She asked me to come with her to the bridal boutique. I remember the way she said it, like it was an obligation, like she was granting me a favor. "You might as well come," she muttered, already halfway out the door. I held on to that little invitation like it was something precious. I ironed my best blouse the night before one, with tiny embroidered flowers on the collar, the kind that reminded me of simpler days when beauty didn't come with a price tag. I brushed my hair, added a little rose petal powder to my cheeks, the same brand I'd worn since she was a child. I wanted to look nice, to feel like I belonged in the room where my daughter would try on the most important dress of her life. The shop was dazzling. All white walls and sparkling mirrors, rows of satin and lace lined up like promises. I stood quietly near the window, my hands folded neatly in front of me as she paraded through options off-the-shoulder mermaid ball gown. She twirled, posed, pouted, and each time she looked at me, it was with a tinge of something embarrassment maybe, or something colder. She kept glancing at the shop attendant, instead asking her for opinions I would have once been trusted to give. Then came the dress, the one. She stepped out in a fitted ivory gown that shimmered like moonlight. I gasped, my hand fluttering to my chest, and said without thinking, "You look beautiful." She turned, eyebrows raised. "Really?" In this lighting next to that sweater, her words hit the air like glass shattering. I blinked. "You should have worn something more." "Neutral," she added, with a tight smile, waving her hand toward me like I was a stain she couldn't quite scrub from the frame. The shop attendant tried to chuckle, but her eyes darted between us. I said nothing, just nodded and stepped back. My blouse suddenly felt too warm, too loud, too wrong. She kept twirling now, surrounded by compliments from strangers, none of them mine. I didn't want to cry, not there, not in front of her. But I felt something slip in my chest, like a thread, pulled too tight, finally snapping loose. Afterward, as we walked to the car, she scrolled through photos on her phone, laughing at her own angles. "Oh, and remind me to ask Aunt Julie for help with the floral arrangements. She actually has taste," she said. I nodded. My throat couldn't quite manage words. I stared down at my shoes, scuffed at the toe, and wondered when I had stopped being someone she admired. We used to play dress-up, her and I. When she was little, she'd drape my scarves around her shoulders and call herself a queen. "Mommy, am I pretty?" she'd ask. "You're the most beautiful girl in the world," I'd say every time, and she'd smile like the sun came out just for her. I didn't think I looked cheap then. I looked like her home. But in that boutique with its marble floors and cold lighting, I was something else, a misplaced object, a background figure she'd forgotten how to love out loud. She didn't notice I skipped dessert when we stopped at the cafe, didn't see the way I folded my napkin too many times just to keep my hands busy. She was already texting someone else, probably her fiancé, probably about the dress. I sat there, the mother of the bride invisible in plain sight. And yet I paid for the dress. I wrote the check the next day, a quiet transaction in a quiet bank without a single thank you. That boutique folded her gown into a silk-lined box and tied it with a ribbon, and she didn't once think about how it got paid for. I did it out of love or habit, or maybe just the aching hope that she'd see me again, not just look at me, but see me. She didn't. That night, I hung my blouse back in the closet and sat on the edge of my bed. I looked at myself in the mirror, same face, same gentle lines around the eyes, same woman who had spent her life giving, and I wondered if being her mother had somehow made me disappear. But I didn't cry, not yet. I just sat there, my hands still folded, and listened to the silence. It started with a tin can under the sink, the kind that used to hold biscuits, the kind no one touches once the cookies are gone. I had tucked it away beneath old dish rags behind the cleaning supplies where no one would look. Every time I saved a little extra from sewing repairs, babysitting for neighbors or skipping something small like new shoes or a cafe treat. I'd drop it into that can. It didn't make much noise, but to me it sounded like possibility. Not for me, of course. For her. She was still in middle school the first time I labeled that tin. I wrote one word in pencil on the lid, wedding. I wasn't sure why I chose that word so early. Maybe it was silly. Maybe it was old-fashioned. But I had grown up watching women around me wait for something joyful. I wanted her to have something that didn't come with shame or struggle attached to it. A celebration without worry. Years passed, and the tin grew heavy. Eventually, I upgraded to a small savings account and then a certificate of deposit at the local bank. Quiet progress. I didn't talk about it much. There were more pressing things: rent, school supplies, dentist bills. I kept that account like a secret bouquet. I was growing for a day I couldn't yet picture. I imagined her in white, yes, but also surrounded by warmth. A home full of love guests laughing me in the corner with a glass of lemonade, smiling, because I had made something beautiful happen. It wasn't easy. There were months when I had to choose between adding to her future or replacing a broken heater in winter. More than once I chose cold. I wrapped myself in blankets, wore gloves indoors. When she was little, she used to complain about the draft in our apartment, not knowing that draft was paid for by my silence and savings. That wedding fund was the thread that wove through every quiet sacrifice I made. She never asked where the money came from, and I never told her. It didn't matter then. I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it because that's what love felt like to me, a quiet stretch, an invisible gift. When she turned 16, I considered using some of it for a car. She wanted one badly. I even went as far as to look at used listings, ran some numbers. But something in me said, not yet. Maybe it was intuition, or maybe I just didn't want the wedding dream to unravel before it began. And now it feels absurd, doesn't it? All that planning, all that waiting. For what? So she could stand in front of a mirror, dismiss me with a wrinkle of her nose and say I looked cheap, so she could laugh at my shoes. I know how I must look to her. I see it now. She lives in a different world, curated, filtered, glossy. Her friends wear designer bags and know how to order wine with confidence. I still clip coupons and wash Ziploc bags for reuse. I'm not glamorous. I'm just me. But when did that stop being enough? There's a photo of us on her 3rd birthday. She's in a pink frilly dress I made by hand, her little shoes scuffed from dancing in the hallway. I'm kneeling behind her arms around her waist, smiling so wide I nearly look like another child. She had cake on her cheeks, glitter in her hair, and in that picture she's leaning into me, like I'm her entire world. I keep that photo in my wallet, have for years. It's the one I take out when the ache gets too big, when I forget what all this was for. I looked at it after the dress fitting. I looked at it and wondered if she'd ever lean into me like that again. I don't blame her entirely. The world tells young women what to want, who to value. It tells them that shiny is better, newer is worth more, and old things, old people are meant to be tolerated, not honored. She didn't invent that belief, but she swallowed it whole. And I made it easy. I gave and gave and gave. Never asked for praise, never showed the receipt. I thought love meant never keeping score. But maybe that's where I was wrong. Maybe boundaries aren't signs of resentment. Maybe they're signs of self-respect. I'm not angry. That's the strange part. Not yet, at least. I'm just tired. Tired of watching her step over the bridge I built without even glancing down. Tired of pretending that silence is the same as peace. That wedding fund, it holds more than money. It holds winters I spent with chapped hands, birthdays. I skipped my own cake holidays where I wrapped second-hand items in fancy paper. It holds every Yes, I said, when I wanted to say wait. Every late-night worry, every proud moment I didn't speak aloud. I don't want her to repay me. That's not what this is about. I just wanted her to remember, to look at me once and say, I see what you did. I see you. But she doesn't, not yet, and maybe not ever. There's a particular kind of joy that comes from doing things in the background, a quiet, steady sort of pride that doesn't need applause or recognition, just the soft satisfaction of knowing you've helped someone else rise a little higher. That's the kind of pride I've always carried when it came to her. When she got engaged, she didn't tell me in person. She texted a photo of the ring with a handful of exclamation points and a blurry selfie. Look, it read. I stared at that little screen for a long while. I hadn't even known he was planning to propose. No one had asked me anything, not about the ring, not about timing, not about whether I thought he was the right one. Still, I smiled. I tapped out, "Congratulations, sweetheart. I'm so happy for you, and I meant it. I always meant it." The weeks that followed were a blur of Pinterest boards, venue tours, and phone calls I was rarely included in. When she did call, it was always with a list. I need you to check on the flowers, or can you confirm the catering? And I did. I took notes. I made calls. I walked to the flower shop downtown and listened to options about lilies versus hydrangeas like it was sacred scripture. I filled my days with these errands, wrote everything in a little notebook with her initials on the cover. I kept it organized, precise, reliable. I wanted her to feel like everything would go smoothly. I wanted to give her that. There's no word for the joy of being needed, even in small ways. Of feeling like your presence, though muted, is still part of the structure. Like mortar between bricks, unseen but essential. That's what I was to her planning process. Not the architect, not even a builder, but the glue holding it together. And I was proud of that. I'd sit on the edge of my bed in the evenings and reread her schedule, making sure no detail had slipped. I'd imagine her walking down the aisle, radiant and serene, the crowd gasping as she entered. And somewhere in the back row I'd be there, smiling hands, folded heart so full it could burst. That was enough for me, truly. I found an old brooch in a wooden box, tucked behind my winter scarves, a delicate piece shaped like a small silver dove. It had belonged to my mother. I cleaned it gently with a soft cloth, wrapped it in tissue paper, and placed it in a little velvet pouch. I planned to give it to her on the morning of the wedding. A quiet tradition passed on, a whisper of lineage. I imagined her pinning it somewhere inside the gown, close to her heart, carrying the women who came before her, even if she didn't know their names. But some days she wouldn't answer my calls, or she'd respond with curt one-word replies. Busy. Can't talk. Later. I'd make excuses for her. Of course she was overwhelmed. It was her wedding after all. Stress made people forget things, didn't it? She wasn't always like this. There was a time she couldn't fall asleep unless I sang to her. A time she'd bring me wildflowers in her fists bruised and half wilted, but given with love. I have a drawer full of her childhood drawings. All of them show me with bright yellow hair and giant smiling eyes. "That's you, Mommy," she used to say. "You're always smiling in my pictures." I keep those pictures even now, especially now. Because lately her smiles don't reach me anymore. They aim outward toward cameras, toward acquaintances who compliment her new shoes. And when she does glance at me, it's with a kind of shallow tolerance, like I'm a relic. She's too polite to discard. Still, I didn't stop helping. I stitched lace onto table runners. I hemmed her veil when the boutique wouldn't make last-minute alterations. I folded place cards, counted RSP notes, arranged gift bags. And every time she said good job rarely and mostly distracted, I felt something warm settle in my chest. She didn't say thank you, but sometimes she smiled briefly, and I let that count for more than it should have. Is that what love becomes over time? Learning to settle for crumbs and pretending they're a feast? One afternoon, she asked me to stay home during a venue walkthrough. It's just going to be the planners and my in-laws, she said quickly. You wouldn't enjoy it anyway. I nodded. I said, of course, sweetheart. Then I hung up the phone and sat at the kitchen table in silence for a long time. The teacup in my hand had long gone cold. I didn't even notice. I used to think pride came from being celebrated. But I was wrong. It comes from knowing that what you built quietly, patiently mattered, even if no one ever says so, even if the people you built it for turn away. I don't need a spotlight. I never have. But I do wish just once she had turned to me and said I couldn't have done this without you. Because it's true, she couldn't have. It was a Sunday, warm and hazy, one of those early spring afternoons when the light filters through the trees just right, softening everything it touches. She invited me to lunch, a rare gesture lately. Just us girls, she said. I took it as a sign. Maybe she was trying. Maybe that child I once cradled was still in there, buried beneath wedding spreadsheets and cold politeness. I wore my nicest cardigan, the beige one with the pearl buttons. I'd even sewn one back on that morning, careful to make the stitches invisible. I added a string of costume pearls, the kind that once fooled even my late husband's discerning eye. And I dusted my cheeks with a bit of rose powder, hoping to look like someone worth taking to lunch. The restaurant was fancier than I expected, white tablecloths, menus without prices, waiters who spoke in hushed tones and never made eye contact. I felt small almost instantly, but I smiled. I followed her lead. She was already seated when I arrived, her phone in hand, laughter bubbling from her lips as she texted someone. She barely looked up. You found it, she said. Not even a hello. I sat, unfolded the napkin across my lap. The table was too wide, the silverware too polished. Everything gleamed in a way that made me feel faded. We ordered, or rather, she ordered for me. She'll have the salmon, she said, like I was a guest who didn't know how to speak for herself. I nodded. It didn't matter. I wasn't hungry anyway. Then came the comment. It was mid-lunch, somewhere between her talking about the floral arrangements and the guest list. She looked up suddenly, tilted her head, and said, with a small laugh, You know you really need to update your look, Mom. That sweater screams thrift store. It was meant to be a joke. I could tell by the smirk, but it wasn't funny, not to me. Something inside me folded inwards, not broke, not yet, but bent in that silent way heartbreak often does. I looked down at the sweater. I had chosen it carefully. I had thought it looked elegant. It was soft, warm, familiar. I had even steamed it the night before, hoping to wear something nice for her, for us. I set down my fork. My hands were shaking just slightly, the kind of tremble that comes with age or emotion or both. I smiled tightly. I've always liked this sweater, I said. My voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. She shrugged and went back to scrolling her phone. I watched her from across the table, her carefully curled hair, the glint of gold jewelry, the way she waved away the waiter like he was part of the decor. There was a time she wore mismatched socks and cried when I combed her hair too hard, a time when she wanted to dress just like me. We're twins, she used to giggle, pulling at my sleeve. Now I was just outdated. She started talking about her fiancé's mother then. She has this amazing taste. So elegant, so effortless, she gushed. She offered to help with the welcome dinner. Can you believe it? So generous. I nodded, said nothing. I wanted to say I was the first one who ever gave you anything. I gave you my body, my sleep, my time, my dreams. I gave you my youth. I gave you everything, and I never asked for credit. But I didn't say it. I just sipped my water, which tasted like nothing. At the end of lunch, she didn't offer to split the bill. Not that I expected her to. I paid again. Quietly, automatically. She barely said thank you. Just gathered her things and kissed the air beside my cheek. "We'll do this again sometime," she said, already walking away. I sat there for a while after she left. The waiter came and cleared the table. I watched the empty chair across from me and imagined her still sitting there, the younger version, the one who used to slip her hand into mine and ask, "Do I look pretty, Mama?" She always did. Even when her hair was a mess and her teeth were crooked, she always did. And I always told her so. It struck me then like a sudden cold wind she had stopped asking what I thought, because somewhere along the way she stopped thinking I had anything to offer. I left a tip and walked home slowly. The streets were busy with people younger than me, faster than me, but I walked like I had nowhere to be, and no one waiting because I didn't. Not really. When I got home, I hung up the sweater carefully. I smoothed its sleeves. It still smelled like the lavender sachet I kept in my drawer. It was clean. It was soft. It had done nothing wrong. And still somehow it had become a target. I sat on the bed and looked at myself in the mirror, not with judgment, not with pity, just with honesty. I looked tired, yes, and older. But I also looked kind. I looked steady. I looked like someone who had built a whole life out of nothing but devotion and threadbare hope. And I wondered again if she would ever see that. I first noticed it in the way her laughter changed. Once her laugh used to bubble up from her chest, unfiltered and childlike, even as an adult. But after the engagement, it took on a different shape, tighter, more calculated, like it was trying to match someone else's rhythm. I watched it happen quietly in those early dinners, where I was still occasionally invited. She would laugh when her fiancé's mother laughed. She'd nod eagerly, folding herself into their polished conversations about foreign wines and garden parties and spa memberships. They were kind to me on the surface. They smiled. They complimented my casserole. But their eyes flicked quickly over me like I was a coat rack, by the door necessary but unimportant. I wasn't part of the conversation. I was part of the setting. Once during one of those early dinners, I mentioned a sale at the local grocery store out of habit, I suppose. Her future mother-in-law chuckled lightly and said, "Oh, that's adorable. I haven't looked at a grocery ad in years." My daughter laughed with her, not just politely, genuinely. As if saving money was something outdated, as if thrift were something to be ashamed of. I looked down at my plate. I'd brought a pie I'd baked from scratch, a recipe passed down through my family. No one touched it. After that, I stopped offering. The new circle she was entering, or rather sprinting toward, didn't have room for people like me. They were sleek, effortless. Everything about them was ironed flat. Their accents, their wardrobes, their conversation. They spoke in curated tones, like they were always in a magazine interview. My daughter had started mirroring them. Even her voice had changed higher, more clipped at the edges. She began dressing differently, too. Bolder cuts, cleaner lines. She asked me once, without a hint of malice, "Do you think I could pass for someone from the city now?" I remember blinking, unsure how to respond. "You've always been lovely," I said. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was the truth. She started spending more time with them, less with me. Phone calls became shorter, texts more transactional. "Do you have the florist receipt?" "Can you drop off the cake samples at noon?" Always requests, never stories, never warmth. When I showed her a pair of earrings I'd been saving to give her, small pearls, delicate and old from my own wedding, she looked at them briefly and said, "They're nice, Mom, but maybe not my style. His family is gifting me something from Tiffany's. I nodded, folded the velvet box closed, and placed it back in my drawer. She never asked about them again. The truth is, I was losing her. Not to a person, not even to a wedding, but to a performance. A stage where she played a new role and I didn't have a ticket. I started talking to myself more in the house. Little comments while I washed the dishes, while I folded towels. She used to love these. Remember when she couldn't sleep without that bear? The silence after each sentence was unbearable. A long, echoing nothing. She once told me when she was 15 and furious at the world, "You don't get it, Mom. You've never been anyone." I had brushed it off then, the way parents do when their children wound them in ignorance. But now I wondered if she still believed that. I wanted to scream that being someone doesn't require applause or a nameplate. I've been a nurse with no license, a chef with no title, a counselor with no degree. I've held her fevered body through nights of sickness. I've taught her how to tie her shoes, how to spell her name, how to pray when she was scared. I gave her everything I was, and now she wanted to forget where she came from, as if who I was might stain her ascent. But here's what she doesn't understand. You can build yourself new, yes, but if you erase your foundation, the whole thing will tremble the moment life shakes. She still asked me for help, but never for company. Still took from me, but never sat with me. And I began to wonder, what was I funding? Really? A wedding or a performance I wasn't invited to watch. One evening, after another brief phone call, I stood in front of the mirror in the hallway. The same mirror she used to practice ballet poses in back when she was small and joyful. I looked at myself, my hair more silver than black now, my hands lined with stories, my shoulders still strong from decades of carrying what needed to be carried. I looked at myself and said aloud, "You are not cheap. You are not small. You are not forgotten." I said it twice, and then I said it again until I believed it. It was the morning of her bridal trial, a day she had circled in red ink months ago. She reminded me about it at least 3 times in the week leading up to it. "Don't forget Mom. It's early. I need to look perfect." I marked it on my calendar, even laid out my clothes the night before. I didn't want to be late. I didn't want to disappoint her. We arrived at the salon just before 9. It smelled of expensive oils and orchid-scented candles, the kind that clung to the air like something fragile and artificial. Everything gleamed: glass gold fixtures, pristine white chairs. It felt more like a showroom than a place where real people existed. I smiled politely at the receptionist. She didn't smile back. They led us to a private corner where a woman with long, manicured nails and perfect eyeliner began unpacking her tools. "You must be the bride," she said to my daughter, her tone bright. "Practiced." My daughter laughed, poised, completely in her element. She gestured toward me. "And this is my mom," she said, then added almost offhandedly, "But don't worry about her. We're not doing anything elaborate. Just a little powder, maybe. She doesn't need much." She doesn't need much. Those 4 words were said so casually, so smoothly, that no one else in the room seemed to notice them land. But I felt them like stones dropped into a still pond. They sank straight to the bottom of me, leaving silence in their wake. The makeup artist gave me a quick glance and nodded as if my face was a task she'd mentally crossed off. She turned back to my daughter, already beginning to prep brushes and palettes. I sat on the stool in the corner, hands folded in my lap, back straight. I didn't belong there, and everyone knew it, even me. I remember watching her in the mirror, my daughter, my little girl, sitting under the glow of ring lights, eyes closed, as the artist worked her magic. Her skin shimmered, her lashes curled like they were born to. She looked ethereal. But what struck me most was the way she looked right through me as if I were a prop in the room, a placeholder from another life. They talked about contouring, about influencers and lipstick brands I'd never heard of. "This will look amazing in photos," the artist said. "Your cheekbones are just so symmetrical." My daughter laughed again, a laugh I no longer recognized. It was too polished, too distant. When it was my turn, or what was left of it, the artist dabbed a bit of powder across my forehead and cheeks, quick, impersonal. My daughter was already scrolling through photos, barely glancing up. "Just enough to keep the shine down," she said. "No need to go full glam." I caught my reflection in the mirror then, a woman with silver-flecked hair and soft lines around her eyes. My lips were bare, my skin still mine. I looked exactly like someone who had loved another person so thoroughly she forgot what it meant to be looked at with kindness. I remembered another mirror long ago, the day I got married. I didn't have a makeup artist or ring lights. I had my sister who braided my hair and brushed a little pink across my cheeks using the tip of her finger. My dress was borrowed. My shoes didn't match. But when I looked in the mirror, I saw joy. I saw hope. I saw someone about to begin a life she believed in. And now, decades later, I sat beside my daughter, invisible in a room filled with glamour, while she floated higher and farther into a world that had no use for women like me. When we left the salon, she was glowing. "Do I look expensive?" she asked with a grin, half joking. I forced a smile. "You look like a bride," I said, because it was the truth, even if it wasn't the answer she wanted. As we walked to the car, she didn't notice how I lagged behind. She didn't notice how I tugged at the sleeves of my cardigan, suddenly self-conscious of its frayed cuffs. She didn't notice that I hadn't spoken in 10 minutes. I thought briefly about all the times I had made her feel beautiful, how I had clapped every time she spun in a dress, how I'd told her she was radiant even with spaghetti sauce on her chin. I had built her confidence, like a cathedral stone by careful stone. And now, in this moment, I was standing outside its doors, no longer invited inside. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the kitchen window, a cup of tea cooling beside me. I watched the streetlights flicker and thought of my own mother, how gently she used to press cold cream into her cheeks before bed, whispering affirmations to her reflection. She never had much, but she carried herself like a queen in exile, quiet, resilient, proud. I touched my face then. The powder was still faintly there, ghost-like, almost mocking. I wiped it off with a damp cloth. I wanted my own skin back, the one she used to press her tiny hand against as a child and say, "You're so soft, Mommy," like a blanket. She doesn't say that anymore, but I remember. And for now, memory is all I have left to wrap around me. It's a strange kind of hurt, the kind that doesn't come from cruelty, but from absence, from something that should have been there and simply wasn't. Not a slap, not a scream, just an emptiness where love should have echoed. That's what her silence became. Not loud, just hollow, heavy. I remember the day I finalized the payment for the venue. It was a sunny Tuesday, birds chattering outside the bank, as if they knew nothing of disappointment. I had taken the bus into town carrying a folder neatly labeled with everything she'd asked for, contracts, receipts, the careful budget I had adjusted again and again to meet her rising demands. It felt like walking in with a slice of my soul. The woman at the front desk smiled when I handed over the check. "Oh, you must be the mother of the bride," she said cheerfully. "Your daughter is lucky. Not everyone has a mom willing to do all this." I nodded and smiled, too tired to say anything else. She didn't know that this wasn't money set aside for extravagance. It was scraped together from careful years, each dollar carved out of meals, skipped new shoes, postponed small indulgences never taken. She didn't know that I'd canceled my annual doctor's checkup to make the final deposit on time. But that's what mothers do, isn't it? We make space. We stretch. We disappear beneath the weight of our giving. That night, I called her. "It's all done," I said. "The venue's confirmed. Everything's ready." I waited hard, oddly fluttering. For what, I'm not sure. Maybe just a word, a simple "thank you, Mom." She was quiet for a beat, then replied, "Cool. I'll update the planner." That was it. Not "thank you," not "you're amazing." Not even I appreciate it. Just a technical update, a business transaction wrapped in cold efficiency. My heart stung in a way I didn't expect. I didn't want applause, but I wanted to be seen. And that was becoming the pattern, invisible hands doing visible work always behind the scenes, never acknowledged. I packed the guest welcome bags alone. I assembled the seating chart when her friends bailed last minute. I called the bakery 3 separate times to get the flavors right. Every time I tried to share what I'd done, she would reply with "okay," or "good," or worse, "I already told you I needed that." Not once did she say, "Thanks for handling this. I know it's a lot." And I started to realize something that made my stomach twist. Maybe she didn't think it was a lot. Maybe all of this to her was just what mothers are supposed to do. An invisible job done by someone too old to matter in photos too plain to walk her down the aisle too ordinary. I told myself it was stress. Weddings are overwhelming. She'll come around. She's just preoccupied. But as the days passed and my heart continued to show up without being acknowledged, I felt the weight growing. Not in big dramatic bursts, but in tiny silent collapses. I remember walking past her room one evening. She was talking on the phone with a friend. I paused just outside the door, not to eavesdrop, just to hear her voice. She was laughing. She sounded free. She said, "Yeah, I'm handling most of it myself. It's been a lot of work." And then she added, "Mom's been around, but you know how she is, old school." Old school. As if that explained away everything I'd done. I went back to the kitchen. I stood in front of the sink, hands in lukewarm dishwater, and blinked back a tear I didn't want to fall. There's a grief that comes not from death, but from being erased while still alive. And maybe I let it happen. Maybe in trying to give her everything, I forgot to remind her that I was something too. It made me think of the time when she was 7 and won a prize at school, a certificate for kindness. She had rushed home waving it in the air, beaming. "I won, Mama. I was nice to everyone." I had scooped her up in my arms and said, "Of course you did. That's who you are." And she had buried her head into my shoulder and whispered, "I learned it from you." I had forgotten that moment. Until that night. Until I stood there in the kitchen listening to the quiet. It's strange how children can forget the roots that taught them how to bloom. And it's stranger still how those same roots will keep holding firm even when the flower no longer turns back toward them. Still I finished the place cards. Still I double-checked the guest list. Still I polished the family heirloom cake server, even though no one had asked if I wanted to be part of the cutting ceremony. Because that's what I'd always done. Love silently. Love steadily. But lately I was beginning to wonder if steady love, when taken for granted, begins to feel like servitude. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't love's fault. Maybe it was mine for allowing the silence to speak louder than I ever did. It was a small thing, a photo, one picture out of hundreds. But sometimes it's the smallest things that carve the deepest cuts. She had scheduled an engagement photo shoot in the botanical gardens just outside town. Just the two of us, she'd said over the phone. I'd assumed she meant me and her mother and daughter. A small celebration. A bonding moment. I even offered to pack snacks, bring an umbrella just in case. I was already thinking about what dress to wear, the navy one, the one she used to say brought out my eyes. But when I arrived at the gardens, she was already posing with him, her fiancé. A photographer buzzed around them like a honeybee, directing angles and lighting. There were no smiles for me, no hugs. She glanced over quickly and waved. "Mom, you're here. Great. Can you hold my purse?" I stood there, the leather strap pressed against my hip, while she twirled, laughed, kissed his cheek. At one point, I shifted my weight and she shot me a look. "Just stay behind the bench. Okay, you're in the background." I stepped back, and then further, until the flowers blurred and the couple became silhouettes through the branches. I stood there invisible again under a jacaranda tree, shedding purple petals like tiny dying dreams. After an hour, the photographer walked over to me. "Would you like to join for one shot?" she asked gently. I smiled. "That's all right. I don't think she wants that." She nodded, said nothing else. But later, as we sat under the shade for a break, I gathered the courage. "Would it be okay if we got one picture together?" I asked, soft, almost ashamed. She blinked, then shrugged. "We're kind of going for a vibe here, Mom. It's more editorial, you know." I didn't know. I just nodded again, shrinking like old paper in water. A few days later, she posted the photos on social media. They were beautiful, ethereal. Her in a flowing white dress, him in soft earth tones, both of them glowing, like they were lit from within. I scrolled through them slowly, one after another, and when I reached the end, dozens deep, I realized I wasn't in a single one. Not a hand, not a smile, not even a shadow. It wasn't just omission, it was erasure. I stared at the screen until it blurred, not from the light, from tears. She didn't tag me, she didn't write thanks to my mom for being there. There wasn't even a nod, a mention, a memory shared. And suddenly I was back in a different photo, one from years ago. She was 6. We were in the backyard with a disposable camera, posing with our arms full of daisies we'd picked from the neighbor's lawn. In that picture, her head is on my shoulder, and our faces are nearly identical with joy. She made me promise to keep that photo on the fridge forever. I still have it. The edges are curled now, the ink's begun to fade. But I remember every color of that afternoon, the way her cheeks were flushed from running, the way she called me her bestest best friend, the way she reached for me always. What happened to that child? Or perhaps the harder question, what happened to me in her eyes? Because somewhere along the way I went from the center of her world to someone cropped out of the frame. I didn't confront her about the photos. I didn't comment, didn't message, didn't hint. I just stayed quiet, like always. But inside something shifted, not anger, not quite. It was the ache of being erased in slow motion. The next morning, I took that old daisy photo from the fridge, pressed it gently into the back of a drawer. Not to forget it. Never that. But because I couldn't keep looking at a version of love that no longer existed in the light of day. I didn't cry that day. Not out loud. But I sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the roofline, holding my tea with both hands, and whispered to the wind I was there. Even if no one remembers, I was there. And somehow that had to be enough. For now. It was one of those late evenings where the house is too quiet, and even the refrigerator hum sounds louder than it should. I sat by the window with a cup of weak tea, looking out at the street lamp, casting long shadows across the lawn. And I thought of her, my own mother. She didn't have much. She wore her sweaters until the elbows thinned out, patched her aprons with mismatched fabric, and lined her shoes with newspaper when the soles wore through. But she carried herself like a cathedral, quiet, solid, sacred. I never once saw her beg for affection, never once heard her raise her voice to demand respect. She simply was. A presence, a mountain, a woman who held everything together while asking for nothing in return. When I was a child, I used to think she was too quiet, too soft. I didn't understand her silences. But now I see it for what it was. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was knowing. It was control. She used to say, "They'll learn, baby. Life has a way of teaching people who forget where they come from." I didn't get it then. I do now. She had a particular look when someone crossed a line, not anger, not hurt, just stillness. That stillness was her boundary. And if you didn't correct yourself, she didn't correct you. She just disappeared a little, pulled her warmth back like the tide, and you'd feel the cold before you realized what you'd lost. I've been thinking of that a lot lately, how easily we disappear when people no longer look at us with love. My daughter hasn't looked at me like that in a long time, not since before the engagement, not since she started curating a new life where I no longer seem to fit. But if my mother taught me anything, it's this: love doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. An absence can be louder than any scream. I remember the time my mother removed herself from her sister's life, a quiet fallout over something small that revealed something much deeper. She didn't fight, didn't plead. She just stopped showing up to the dinners, stopped knitting baby hats, stopped sending birthday cards. And when her sister finally called full of guilt and apologies, my mother answered with, "I'm still here. I just had to stand back." That was all she said. I never forgot that. I've always tried to be gentler, softer. I said yes more than I should have, smiled even when my heart stung, paid, planned, prepared, and waited for love to boomerang back to me. But now I wonder if I've been waiting too long, if in trying to hold the thread between us, I've let her believe I would never put it down no matter how many times she yanked it tight enough to burn. I opened my mother's old jewelry box that night. It still smelled faintly of lavender and dust. Inside was a ring, not gold, not real, but sturdy. She used to wear it every Sunday. I slipped it onto my finger and held up my hand to the light. It didn't sparkle, but it looked strong, honest, unpretentious. Just like her. She used to say, "You don't have to be shiny to be worthy." That sentence stayed with me, but somewhere along the way I forgot it. I let the shine around my daughter blind me. I mistook it for love, for value, for arrival. But now, I think I'm starting to remember. The next morning I wrote down a list, not of things I needed to buy or errands to run, but of what I had done, every payment I'd made. Every gift I'd given, every task I had handled without being asked twice. It wasn't a list for guilt. It wasn't a weapon. It was a quiet reminder to myself that I had been there every step. When I finished, I folded the paper in half and slipped it into the same drawer where I'd hidden the photo of us in the daisies, a drawer for the things I shouldn't have to prove but need to remember nonetheless. Because I'm starting to see things clearly now. And maybe that's what my mother meant all along. Let them forget if they must. Let them think they built it alone. But one day when the noise settles and the glitter fades, they'll look back and see the outline of the hands that held it all together. And even if they don't say it, even if they never say it, I'll know. I was there. I was the ground beneath their feet. The final dress fitting was supposed to be a quiet celebration, a last little moment before the storm of the big day. She told me to come set it offhandedly over the phone, like I was one of the vendors, not her mother. "Just to make sure the hem's right," she said. "You can take some pictures for my socials." I arrived 5 minutes early. She was already there, surrounded by mirrors and chiffon, and a stylist who called her darling every few seconds. I stood by the door for a moment, watching her glide across the floor, her reflection stretching in every direction. She did look beautiful, that part, I could never deny. But what caught me wasn't the dress. It was the way she smiled at her own image, and never once turned to see if I had arrived. Eventually, I cleared my throat. She waved a hand without looking. "There's a chair," she said. "Just sit over there, Mom. Don't get in the way." I sat. The fitting went on for an hour. Hem adjustments, sleeve pinning, fussing over the veil. They asked her how she wanted the bustle done, if she'd prefer ivory buttons or pearl. She responded with firm certainty, like someone auditioning for a role she knew she already had. Every movement was elegant, every word polished. And I sat there like I didn't exist. Until the moment I made a mistake. One of the clips fell from the back of the dress. The stylist had stepped away to grab something, and instinctively, I stood up to help. I've sewn enough hems in my life to know exactly where it belonged. I bent slightly, clip in hand, reaching toward the delicate train of fabric. That's when she turned sharp, impatient. "Don't touch it," she snapped. "You'll mess it up." I froze the clip dangling between my fingers. I tried to smile to soften the moment. I was just trying to help, sweetheart. She looked me up and down. "You don't know how to handle fabric like this. It's not thrift store cotton." And there it was, the insult, casual, clean, delivered with the ease of someone who thought the person standing in front of her had nothing left to hurt. The stylist returned oblivious. I sat down again, slower this time. My heart wasn't racing. It was something worse, quiet, slow, the kind of sadness that settles into your bones and makes you feel heavier than your age should allow. I watched her from the chair, my hands clasped tightly together, the clip still hidden in my palm. My knuckles were white. My breath was shallow. I didn't say another word. When she was done, she asked me to take a few photos. I did. My hands didn't shake, but something else did inside. A knowing, maybe. A final recognition that whatever line had once tethered her to me was now too frayed to hold weight. As we walked out, she barely acknowledged me. She was too busy scrolling through the images on her phone, asking which one would get the most likes. I trailed behind her like a shadow that refused to vanish. We parted at the parking lot. No hug, just a wave and a "see you Saturday," as if I were a guest, as if I hadn't sewn her doll clothes as a child, as if I hadn't stayed up nights worrying when she was sick, as if I hadn't loved her every day of her life, sometimes more than I loved myself. I sat in the car a long while before starting the engine. The sun was beginning to set, casting that golden wash over the dashboard. It made everything look softer, even my hands, though they trembled slightly now. And I thought, this is what it means to become invisible to someone you made. That night I laid the clip on the kitchen table, just a small silver pin forgotten by everyone else. But to me it was everything, the final symbol of the thread I had tried so hard to keep intact. The last time I would ever try to hold the hem of her world together. I tucked it into a drawer, not out of sentimentality, out of clarity. Because something inside me had shifted during that fitting, not with fire, but with frost. A kind of still, quiet closing of a door that should have been shut long ago. And the most painful part, she didn't even notice. I tried. I really did. I fluffed the pillows, smoothed the sheets, turned off the lights, and lay there in the dark like a statue. I counted backward from 100. I listened to the old radiator hiss and pop, like it always does when the night air creeps in. But sleep never came. My body was still, but my mind paced like a mother waiting at a window, worrying about a child who never comes home. The silence pressed on me like a second blanket, one I hadn't asked for, one I couldn't throw off. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the faint cracks that spiderwebbed from the corners. I remembered when she used to climb into bed beside me during storms, her tiny hand gripping mine. "I can't sleep without you," she'd whisper. And I'd rub her back, hum some old lullaby I barely remembered the words to. she'd fall asleep in minutes. Now I was the one lying awake, and she was the one who had left me in the storm. I turned onto my side and looked at the glowing numbers on the clock. 1:17 a.m., then 2:04, then 3:11. I gave up pretending, slipped out from the covers, wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, and went to the kitchen. The floor was cold beneath my feet. The teapot groaned softly as it warmed. I didn't want tea. I didn't want anything. I just needed to do something. Anything to fill the quiet. I sat at the table and opened the little drawer where I keep receipts and utility bills and cards people gave me years ago that I couldn't bear to throw away. And there, beneath an old birthday card she'd once made me in crayon, to the best mommy in the world, was the wedding fund ledger. I'd kept it out of habit, each page dated and notated with careful little rows, deposits, interest earned, occasional withdrawals, a history of love, written in numbers. I ran my fingers down the final entry, the venue deposit. It was the largest one, nearly emptied the account. And for what? I thought about how many times she had taken without acknowledgement, not maliciously, no, just easily, naturally, as if my giving were a law of nature, not a choice, as if I had never been a woman before I was her mother. That night, under the pale kitchen light, I felt it fully for the first time, the shift, not a flare of anger, but a dull, dense ache, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that just knows. I rose from the table and wandered to the living room, pulled the old photo album from the shelf, the thick one with fabric on the spine, and yellowed corners from so many turns. I flipped through the pages slowly. Her first day of school, her first scraped knee, the Halloween costume I stayed up all night sewing, her prom dress altered by hand because we couldn't afford a new one, me in every frame just outside the spotlight, holding up the background, making sure everything looked right. And now I wasn't even invited into the frame anymore. I looked down at my hands. They've aged, yes. The skin is thinner, the veins more visible. But they are the same hands that once buttoned tiny coats, packed school lunches, tied ponytails, and signed checks for things no one ever thanked me for. She used to look at those hands with awe. Now I don't know what she sees, or if she sees them at all. I sat back in the armchair, photo album open on my lap, and stared at a picture of us, one where she was no older than 10, standing on a beach, waves curling at her feet, her arm slung around my waist like it belonged there. She had written in the sand that day, "Me plus Mom equals always." I remember crying when I saw it. Now I could barely look at it, because always, it turns out, was shorter than I thought. I stayed in that chair until dawn, too tired to cry, too awake to sleep, too full of memories I could no longer trust. They felt like visitors from another life, one where I mattered to her in a way that didn't need proving. As the sun broke over the rooftops, I felt something I hadn't felt before, not bitterness, not grief. Resolve. Not the angry kind, not the storming out kind, but the kind my mother once carried in her silence, the kind that comes from knowing when the giving has become a wound, not a gift. And in that quiet resolve, I finally stood up, and I finally let go. The morning after that sleepless night, I moved slowly, not out of fatigue, but intention. I folded the photo album closed, returned it gently to the shelf, and made myself a plain breakfast I barely touched. The sun poured through the window with that warm, golden light I usually found comforting. But that day it just looked like a spotlight I no longer wanted to stand beneath. I didn't make any dramatic calls, didn't rehearse a speech. I didn't even put on my nice cardigan. Instead, I pulled on a soft gray sweater and stepped into my shoes like I was getting dressed for a regular day, except it wasn't. I walked to the bank, The one I'd been visiting for years. The one where the teller knew me by name and always offered a piece of hard candy with my receipts. I waited in line like everyone else, holding the small folder that had once carried all my dreams for her future. Now it just held proof of my endurance. When I reached the counter, I smiled gently as always and asked to speak with someone in private about my account. A few minutes later, I was sitting across from a young man in a crisp shirt, who barely looked old enough to know the difference between sacrifice and savings. He smiled and tapped on his keyboard, waiting for me to explain. "I'd like to close this account," I said. He blinked. "The wedding fund." I nodded. He tilted his head. "The balance is substantial. Are you sure you want to?" "I'm sure." There was a pause. He didn't ask questions after that. Just printed out forms and slid them across the desk. I signed each one with a steady hand. When it was done, he asked, "Would you like the funds transferred or withdrawn in a cashier's check?" "Transfer," I said, "to a new account, in my name only." He nodded, typing again. Purpose. I hesitated. Not because I didn't know, but because I didn't feel like explaining something that was already written across every wrinkle in my hands. "Personal renewal," I finally said. He smiled politely, not understanding. But that was fine. It wasn't for him to understand. The transaction took 10 minutes, but the decision had taken years. As I walked out, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel guilty either. I felt weightless, like I'd just set down a heavy box I'd been carrying for so long I forgot it wasn't supposed to be part of my spine. Back at home, I sat on the edge of my bed, the confirmation slip resting in my lap. It felt strange freeing something so massive with so little noise. I'd expected regret to rush in or doubt to start its usual whispering, but they never came. Only stillness, only peace. I thought about calling her. I imagined the conversation, her voice rising in confusion, in anger. "Why would you do that? The wedding is this weekend." And I'd say softly, firmly, "Because I remembered I matter too." But I didn't call, not yet. Let silence deliver this truth. Let her feel the absence the way I had. The phone stayed quiet all day. I didn't chase it. Instead, I opened the drawer where I kept her bridal brochure, the to-do lists, the seating chart I had triple-checked. I held them for a moment, then folded each one slowly, neatly, and placed them in a box labeled discard. Not with resentment, with reverence, like closing the final page of a book I once loved. Later that evening, I sat with my tea again. It tasted warmer this time. I watched the sky darken, listened to the soft tick of the wall clock, and thought about all the ways I'd emptied myself for others, and how little of me had ever been refilled. But this act wasn't about revenge. It wasn't a punishment. It was a reclamation. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was trying to stop hurting me. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step towards something I'd forgotten was allowed. A life of my own. She must have noticed the money was gone the next day, maybe while confirming final payments, maybe when the planner called to say the florist hadn't received the deposit. I didn't check. I didn't ask. I didn't brace myself. I simply waited. The call came in the late afternoon. I watched the screen light up with her name. For a second, I almost didn't answer. I almost let it ring out the way I had felt left ringing, unanswered, unacknowledged for months. But habit is a hard thing to kill, especially when it wears the face of your child. I picked up. Her voice was sharp. "Mom, what's going on?" "The wedding account is empty." I didn't speak right away. I wanted the silence to settle, to let her feel how much weight lived inside quiet, when it was intentional. "I know," I said. A pause, then sharper. "What do you mean you know? Did you move the money? Why?" My tone didn't change, because I needed to. She made a sound, part gasp, part scoff. You can't just do that, Mom. The venue needs their final payment. The photographer. The planner. I told everyone it was covered. Do you know how embarrassing this is? I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because that was the word she chose. Not hurtful, not surprising, just embarrassing. Still, I said nothing. Mom, seriously, I don't understand. I thought we were good. You've been helping all along, and now you're just what? Punishing me. Right before the wedding. No, I said, calm, firm. I'm not punishing you. Then what are you doing? There was a tremble behind her voice now, not quite fear, not yet regret, but confusion. A daughter realizing her mother might have a line after all. I'm choosing myself, I said. She went quiet. The line buzzed with that strange electric air that comes when someone realizes the floor beneath them isn't as solid as they believed. But, she began, you said you'd pay for it. You promised. I closed my eyes. That word promised it cut, because I had kept every one I ever made to her, and still she had broken so many in return without even knowing. I also said I'd be there for the important parts, I replied, and lately I haven't been allowed to be. Mom, this is my wedding. It's not about. It was never about the money, I said, cutting in, not with anger, with clarity. It was about being seen, being respected, being more than a wallet in the corner of the room. She was quiet again, longer this time. I could almost hear her trying to assemble her reply, 1,000 justifications forming and collapsing before they could make it past her lips. Then finally, so what now? You're just not coming. I didn't say that I said, but I also didn't say I'd keep giving until there was nothing left of me. You can't do this to me. I breathed in deep and steady. It's already done. Another pause. Then the tears came real or performative, I couldn't tell. Years ago, I would have rushed to comfort her, would have apologized even if I wasn't wrong, would have tried to fix it, patch it, make it gentle again. But I sat still. I let the silence speak for me. She cried, pleaded a little, told me I was overreacting, that it was just stress, that she didn't mean all the things she'd said or done, that the dress comments weren't serious, that the makeup artist moment was just a misunderstanding. I let her say it all. And when she ran out of breath, I asked one question. Would you have ever apologized if the money hadn't gone missing? She didn't answer. She couldn't, because we both knew the truth. The call ended not with a bang, but a whimper, a quiet, frayed ending to a rope that had been unraveling for too long. I sat in the quiet house for a long time afterward, staring out at the evening creeping in through the window. The shadows were long now. The light was soft. The silence didn't feel cold anymore. It felt earned. There would be no shouting match, no dramatic walkout, no letters torn in half, just a mother finally choosing her own peace over her daughter's performance. I didn't touch the money for a few days. It sat there in the new account quiet patient, like it had been waiting for me this whole time. Not her, not the vendors, not the silk napkins and gold chairs and rented fairy tale, but me. I went about my days like normal, or at least what passes for normal, when the center of your world has shifted. I watered the plants. I swept the porch. I folded my laundry, slowly running my hands over the fabric like I was reminding myself I still existed outside her orbit. And then one morning I opened a notebook, a blank page. No to-do list, no budget, just space, the kind I hadn't given myself in decades. I wrote one question at the top: what do I want now? Not what she wants, not what the world expects of a mother my age, not what's responsible or logical or good for the family. Just, what do I want? It took me hours to write anything beneath it. My hand hovered above the page, like I was asking for permission. But slowly the words came. Sunlight, quiet, something of my own, a place to breathe, a life that fits me again. I sat with those words, touched them like fabric, tried them on like a coat, and I realized something both painful and freeing. I hadn't asked myself what I wanted in over 20 years, maybe longer. I'd built my world around her, her milestones, her needs, her dreams, and now that she'd outgrown me, I was left with a house full of memories and a heart full of echoes. So I made a decision. I walked into the local community college the next week, not to drop anyone off, to register for myself. I chose 2 classes, creative writing and watercolor, simple things. Gentle things, not a career pivot, not a dramatic reinvention, just a slow reopening of the door I had closed long ago, the door to me. The young woman at the registration desk smiled at my papers, going back to school. No, I said, going forward. She smiled wider at that. I did too. With a portion of the money, I bought supplies, not lavishly, just new pens, clean notebooks, watercolor paper that didn't curl at the edges. I picked out a soft leather satchel one with a worn-in feel. It wasn't for show. It was for carrying dreams without apology. Next, I used part of the fund to take a short trip, just a weekend to the coast, a place I hadn't been in years, though I used to dream of it often. I stayed at a modest bed and breakfast, ate seafood alone by candlelight, watched the sun fold itself into the sea with no one talking over it. On the second day, I walked the beach at sunrise. The wind was gentle, the sky pale and forgiving. I let the water kiss my feet and didn't care that my pants got soaked. I felt like someone slowly returning to her skin. And that night in the quiet of my rented room, I wrote a letter. Not to her, to myself. It read, "You are not a leftover. You are not a shadow. You are not a vessel for someone else's story. You are the author now. You are allowed to begin again. You are allowed to live a life that asks nothing from anyone but truth. You are not empty. You are becoming." I folded the letter and placed it in my notebook. It's still there. The money, most of it remains, not untouched, just untouched by guilt. It's there for what nourishes, not what empties. There for late-night classes, for art supplies, for that small cottage I might rent one day when I'm brave enough to call solitude home. People may think I wasted it. She certainly might. But I know better, because every dollar I spent on her was to build her life, and every dollar I spend now quietly, thoughtfully, is to reclaim mine. The day came wrapped in sunshine, the kind of weather that makes people say, "It's perfect," clear skies, bird song, air that smells like promise. I remember thinking how strange it was that nature could be so beautiful on a day I didn't belong in. I woke up early out of habit, no alarms, just the way my body is wired after years of showing up for people who never had to ask twice. But that morning there was nowhere to be, no schedule to check, no list to run through. I poured myself tea, not coffee, something softer, gentler, easier on the heart. I dressed slowly, not for anyone else, just for myself. A soft blouse, comfortable slacks. I pinned the dove-shaped brooch, the one I had once planned to give her, to my collarbone, not out of spite, just to remind myself I still carried something beautiful. The house was quiet. The phone stayed still. No buzzing, no calls, no last-minute emergencies. She didn't reach out, not even once. I suppose I had known she wouldn't. Pride can be loud, even in silence. I imagined it all as I sipped my tea. The way the guests would file in all dressed up, buzzing with anticipation. The groom straightening his tie, the photographer adjusting her lens, the soft melody of a harp or maybe a string quartet playing something whimsical in the background. And her, my daughter, standing at the threshold in her white gown, glowing radiant the way I had always imagined. Except now, I wasn't in the picture. I wasn't in the pews. I wasn't in the family portraits. I wasn't even in the air she breathed that day. She had made sure of that. But I wasn't sad. Not in the way you might think. There was grief, yes, but not the sharp, breaking kind. It was more like fog, soft, encompassing. The kind you learn to live with. The kind you can breathe through if you're still enough. Around noon, I packed a small lunch and took a drive. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't owe anyone a schedule anymore. I ended up at the lake on the edge of town, the one we used to visit when she was little. She'd feed the ducks while I sat on the bench and watched her laugh at their waddle. Those afternoons were simple, whole, before things became complicated and conditional. The lake looked the same. The dock creaked just as it used to. I walked slowly, found our old bench, sat down. And I cried. Not because I wasn't at the wedding, but because I'd finally stopped pretending I had to be. It's a strange, quiet freedom the moment you realize you don't have to keep proving your worth to someone who refuses to see it. That you can step away without needing to make a scene. That you can let go not with bitterness, but with grace. I imagined someone asking her, "Where's your mother?" And her saying something like, "She couldn't make it." Or maybe we had a disagreement. Or maybe nothing at all. And that's all right. Let her explain it however she needs to. I know the truth. I know the years. I know the sacrifices. I know the hands that sewed and cooked and consoled and held. And more than anything, I know that I was a good mother. Not perfect, not always right, but loving, steady, fiercely present. I stayed at the lake until the sun began to dip, watched the sky stretch itself into colors people pay thousands to capture in photos. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for someone to come back and thank me. Because I wasn't waiting at all. I was living. For me, there is something sacred about silence, not the kind forced by pain or distance, but the kind you choose. The kind that feels like a warm coat pulled over your shoulders after a long, cold storm. I came home that night and didn't check the phone. I didn't open social media. I didn't ask for photos or gossip or aftermaths. The wedding was over. The chapter closed. And for the first time, I didn't feel small because of it. I sat in my chair by the window wrapped in an old blanket, the dove brooch still pinned close to my heart. And I let the stillness settle around me, not as emptiness, but as space. Space I had made. Space where my worth didn't need defending. I thought of my mother again, how she carried herself through life like a candle that never needed a spotlight to glow, and I smiled knowing I had finally understood her silence. Some endings don't come with applause. Some justice doesn't shout. Some power moves are so quiet they sound like breathing. I didn't need to raise my voice. I just needed to remember my worth. And now I give her silence. And in it, I find peace.